Howdy y'all, it's Chris with Shell Fitness, favorite trainer of the belt buckle. Today we're going to be reviewing one of the 4 quadriceps muscles, the rectus femoris. Before we get into that, make sure to follow us on Instagram and YouTube. If you want to become a trainer, San Diego, September 10th, October here in Los Angeles, the 14th. So let's check out the rectus femoris, one of the 4 muscles of the quadricep. We're going to go over the origin, the insertion, and the action. But before we get into that, let's check out some of the bones. So we have the pelvis, which is the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. The longest bone of the body is the femur. The floating bone, which is your patella or kneecap. Then we have the 2 lower bones of the shank, the most distal. The bigger one, I think a T-rex, is the tibia, which is medial. And the lateral, you have the fibula, which is the non-weight bearing bone. And they articulate into the tarsals, of which there's 7 of them. You remember the name of the ankle? Look how flexible Skelly is. The heel bone is the calcaneus. That's where the Achilles goes into. Remember Achilles held in the water Styx by his mom, the only part of him that was mortal. And then you have the metatarsals and the phalanges. So you get all different types of factoids on life when we're going over Skelly and anatomy. So let's check out the origin. The anterior, inferior iliac spine. So in the anatomical position, which is here, you're going to have anterior and posterior. If you were to grab your ring finger and your thumb and you grab your pelvis, we should have a slight anterior pelvic tilt. Think of it like as a thumb's distance above the middle finger and the ring finger, or the index finger. Not that much. So we don't want to be here, which is a pretty crazy anterior pelvic tilt. We don't want to be too back, which would be a posterior tilt. We just want to be slightly anteriorly tilted. So we have the anterior inferior. So you take the ASIS, which is the anterior superior, and you go right below it, and that's where the rectus femoris originates. Also at the rim of the acetabellum on the ilium. So I say acetabellum. I don't know if that's my southern draw. I wish I had one, but some people say I do. I've heard other people say the acetabellum. I'm not an anatomy expert with the proper pronunciations, but I call it the acetabellum. It's going to insert into the patella, but also the tibial platform. So think of like grabbing a rock and you're skipping it. The more times a muscle is like anchored down in the body, it's just going to be stronger. Okay, your rectus abdominis, remember rectus means straight in Latin. You have your deviations that staple you down. It makes it stronger. So the fact that the rectus femoris goes into the patella first and then into the tibia just makes that area stronger. And then the actions. Come on, Skelly. Skelly's losing it. We need to get a new one soon. At the hip, the rectus femoris is going to flex. With a bent knee, you should be able to get to 130 degrees. With a straight leg, you should be able to get to 90. At the knee, the rectus femoris is going to extend. The 4 muscles of the quadricep, the rectus femoris is the only biarticulate one, so that means it acts on the hip as well as the knee. The other 3, as well as the rectus femoris, are going to extend the knee. So you got the vastus lateralis, medialis, intermedias, and we'll go over those in a different video. So the rectus femoris primarily is an extensor at the knee, but it does work on the hip as a flexor. So let's talk about tightness real quick. I've heard a lot of clients that have tightness in the hip. Now ask yourself, what does the average person do when they have tightness? They're going to get down in this position, they're going to come up there, they're going to stretch and stretch and stretch, and they're doing it all the time. It doesn't get better. Think of a car that has the bolts that are beginning to get loose. What do? You tighten it. So we tighten it on the car to make it more stable. So let's beg the question, maybe it's tight here because somewhere else on the lateral, posterior, mobility up here or at the ankle isn't optimal. So if your glutes on the posterior side aren't activating or firing as much because we're sitting down all the time, maybe if we start doing some glute work, some bridges, you won't feel that tightness. The lateral part, do we get out here a lot? Now, this is a ball and socket joint, very similar to the shoulder joint. Shoulder joint has more range of motion, which is less stable. Cannot palpate the head of the femur. So it's coming into the body. The femur, the femoral head goes into the acetabellum, which makes it more stable, but we don't have that mobility. Skelly has that mobility easily. He can throw his leg over here and back. We can't do that as well. So we're going to have, in the sagittal, the frontal, and transverse plane, we can't do this with our leg. And so the fact that we have more mobility at the shoulder We don't necessarily have that at the hip, but you got to check out other potential reasons for that tightness. So we'll do some side band walks, go back and forth to activate the glute med, but get the hip into all three planes of motion. We treat the hip very similar to the knee joint, which is a hinge, only does one plane. We squat, we hinge, we lunge, we do everything in the sagittal plane. So maybe we're getting tightness because we don't get out here as much. So do some side lunges. Teach the body to move how it wants to move. Look at the ankle as well. Maybe you don't have optimal range of motion, dorsiflexion. You can just put your fist down into the wall, give yourself about 4 inches. You should be able to get your knee to touch the wall. If you can't do that, you probably lack dorsiflexion. So let's work on that. Bridges, side band walks. Also take a look at your thoracic spine. Maybe you don't have that mobility. You got to go proximal and distal to the joint that you have problems with. So if you have tightness here, I'd be willing to bet it's probably not this area. Check out the knee, the ankle, check out the lumbar area, also the spine. But it's not going to hurt to strengthen that area. When was the last time you put a band on your toes and you did some loaded flexions and you held? Come back down. Boom. And boom. A simple test I like to do, is it truly a weak muscle? Just stand here for 15, 20 seconds. If it really starts to hurt, or you can do like a Thompson test, maybe we need to strengthen that. All right, so that's tightness. It's the rectus femoris, origin, anterior, inferior spine, insertion of patella in the tibial tuberosity via the patella ligament, action, flexion at the hip, extension of the knee. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and YouTube. Have a great